Hello, everybody. Good afternoon, and welcome to the ELIXIR second webinar for the process to select the ELIXIR core data resources. My name is Susanna Repo, and I'm here at the ELIXIR Hub. And I would just like to give a short introduction here in the beginning. Can you all hear me? I presume so.
Yes.
Great. Thank you very much. All right. So the ELIXIR data platform, work package 3, as part of the Accelerate project, prepared and worked on indicators and a process for the selection of ELIXIR core data resources. And these indicators and the process were presented to the ELIXIR heads of nodes in the June meeting. And at that meeting, it was decided and discussed by the heads of nodes that the process will need to be tested before full adoption. And based on this feedback, the ELIXIR Hub has now then, with the data platform, developed a detailed process for the testing of the selection of core data resources. And we opened the call for candidate core data resources in October, and we had the first webinar to describe the process in October. And now this is the second webinar to describe the process, the details of it, and also provide you an opportunity to ask questions with regards to the core data resources. So with that, I would like to hand the laptop to Joe McIntyre here next to me, who will present the indicators for ELIXIR core data resources.
Hello, good afternoon. I'll just start, I think. How do you advance your slides?
There we go.
Okay.
It's just the arrow.
Okay, so what are the core data sources for ELIXIR? They're basically resources that are of fundamental importance to the life sciences community, and in particular for their use, reuse, and also their long-term preservation of submitted data and more curated data. And usually these resources would be of wide application, so they'd be collections of generic value to life science. They might be considered an authority in their field for one or more characteristics, and they would show, usually they would show a high level of usage and of scientific quality and of service. And on top of this, you know, the sort of feel you get for core data resources is that they tend to be quite well known. Lots of people will have heard of them. Lots of journals will cite them and have them on their lists of, you know, suitable data resources to submit data to. Funders will know about them. Indeed, they will be funded by some funders. They're usually very well maintained, with, you know, to a sort of professional level of service, you know, with very well characterized processes that manage those resources and the dependencies on them. And indeed, these resources often do have a lot of dependent databases based on top of them. And, you know, we don't expect, you know, this is not the whole story, but we do expect that these core data resources kind of exist within an ecosystem of databases. And often the other parts of this ecosystem would have you know, different motivations to being a core resource. For example, they might be on a particular topic rather than a generic topic. And so the core data resources are sort of the heart or pinnacle, if you like, of within the ELIXIR mission, and that really identifying them from among the ELIXIR services is a critical part of how we're going to be able to describe ELIXIR to a number of key stakeholders. So basically, the core data resources emerge from the ELIXIR services. The ELIXIR services are described in the service delivery plans from all the nodes. And, you know, all the services and all the core resources should be, you know, built and maintained towards fulfilling the ELIXIR mission of building a sustainable infrastructure in Europe for life sciences data. So why do we want to identify these core resources? Well, the first thing is that we want to be able to talk about, you know, what the heart of ELIXIR is in a straightforward way. So when we can point to a set of core data resources, this means that this will build confidence in the community, and we can be clear about what we're talking about when we talk about infrastructure for life sciences research data. And then, in terms of the skill sets that are required to do this, we can build capacity and spread excellence around all the different data resources and their management. And then finally, if we can sort of be coherent about what the data resource provision is across Europe, then we can perhaps be more competitive as a whole and be more attractive as a collaborator in research actions going forward. The thing is, how do you actually define these core data resources? And we might feel that we have a good idea of what they are, but how do you define, in quantitative and qualitative terms, what they actually are? And so we have developed a number of indicators that we would expect would be able to characterize one of these core data resources. So the sort of 5 main categories of this are scientific focus and quality, what about the community that's being served, about the quality of the service, which is slightly different from the quality of the science, what the funding infrastructure is, what the governance is, and can we find stories and evidence to support the fact that these are impactful on the wider community, so translational stories. And you'll see at the bottom of this slide there's a link to the F1000 ELIXIR channel, where indeed this has all been written up as a paper, so you can download it and read it at your leisure afterwards if you like. I think we're waiting for a new version at the moment, but there's basically 2 positive peer review comments on it, so we'll be a new version shortly, and all of these, and it should also be available in Europe PMC and PubMed and PMC in the USA. So we're talking about the quality of science and scientific focus. I mean, basically, what we would need to know is this an archive or is it a knowledge base? And by that we mean, does this resource take submissions of de novo data? That would be an archive. Or is it a resource that really combines a number of factors together to make a knowledge base? So it might be, a knowledge base might consist of data coming from the archives, but also potentially from the, things that have been described in the scientific literature. So it's really pulling together lots of different threads, and that's the sort of fundamentally the 2 different types of resource that we have. And then, some idea of what the scope of the resource is, like what is the scientific coverage? Does it cross all species? Is it only humans? Is it primates? Is it bacteria? And how comprehensive is it? And then thirdly, some idea of the international dimension, like who delivers this resource? Is it a group that has partners across the globe, or is it just in Europe, or are there collaborations with other similar centres in different continents, and so on? And then finally, one indicator of quality is staff effort. I mean, not exactly, but you would expect that a resource that has a reasonable staff working to make the resource would be of reasonable quality. And I think we've asked for a staff effort to be divided into some key roles, like curators. Do you have a lot of curators, developers, and bioinformaticians? The second set of indicators is about the community, and this is one of the most quantitative categories, if you like, because it's talking about who's using the resource. And these are things that one can measure by fairly standard methods. So the first one is who's using the resource, how many IP addresses access the web page or the website, how many IP addresses are using APIs and so on, or downloading from FTP sites, how many page views are there, how many sessions. And it really, we've given in, I think, I'll come to the documents we're creating around this later, but I think we've given some idea of the kind of things that could go in this category. And we don't have to supply all the information that is outlined in the template, but I think certainly there'd be an expectation of some of that to be included. And then, the potential usage is really to say how big is the community that might use this resource. So this is to sort of recognize that some resources can be core, but they might not have a very extensive user community. And I think the proteomics community is is a good example of that, where there aren't like huge and large numbers of proteomic scientists across the globe. Nevertheless, there are core resources that they absolutely need, and without them, the community would take a nosedive. And then the third category here of reach and usage is how much is this resource referred to in the scientific literature. And there are three things that we can look at here. One is, how many times is the resource named? If you can search the full text, we've used Europe PMC because that's one of the few places you can get a wide corpus of full text. If you search the full text and abstracts in Europe PMC, how many times is the resource, how many articles does the resource get named in? How many articles do accession numbers get cited in? And, if the resource has indeed had a paper written about it that's in the Nucleic Acids Research Database Edition, for example, how many times is that paper cited? So this is really about, trying to quantify to some extent how well known and well used the resource is in other people's scientific experiments. And then finally, another quantitative factor is how many other resources depend on your resource. So, for some resources like the European Nucleotide Archive, some of the usage of the archive actually comes through Ensemble, because Ensemble shows obviously genome maps and genome visualizations, but of course much of the data that they're showing comes from the European Nucleotide Archive. So, and this is the true for many large resources, and I think this is an important point because, if your direct use, your direct use might not be so massive on your website, but if you're pushing data and information to lots of other websites, that's a sort of indirect use, and it's a really important thing that we're trying to show is that what role does this resource have in the wider data ecosystem. And then we come on to the quality of service. So this is really quite a technical category. So a sort of fundamental thing is, does the resource use persistent and unique identifiers? We usually talk about accession numbers in biology, but it could also be DOIs. And then, to get an idea of how current and how the size of the resource, what is the data throughput? How many records are curated, how many depositions are made, what are the number of entries, and this can also be in terms of accession numbers minted, but also it could be in terms of bytes as well, in terms of the size. If you have very big data sets, then you won't have a lot of accession numbers, but you'll be using a lot of disk space, for example. And then there's the sort of technical performance of the services and resources. So, what is the uptime of the website? Is it available 99.7% of the time, or is it only available 50% of the time? And, do the pages and the data, can the data be retrieved in reasonable timeframes, wait timeframes? Does the resource use community-recognized standards for metadata? And this is very fair. This is a very fair-like metric that we've got. And in fact, in the paper that I mentioned on the ELIXIR channel, we have mapped all of these indicators to FAIR principles, and they map extremely well. And in fact, these indicators that we're using go beyond the FAIR principles to really talk about impact. So yeah, standard metadata are the facts, if you like, in the resource linked to documentation to show the provenance. So, for example, if it's a sequence and a sequence to the database, can you link to the paper in which the experiment's described? Is the data available for reuse? So, what kind of services are attached? What, like APIs, bulk download facilities? What kind of formats are available that make things reusable? JSON, XML, that kind of thing. And does the resource have support its customers? Do they use user research and in their developing their websites? Do they have a help desk? Have they got mechanisms to really get feedback on what they're doing? Training activities to some extent come into this as well. The fourth category is the governance, and so one of the critical things here is, does the resource have an independent and international scientific advisory board to steer the directions of the project? And do the is the legal framework there that will support open science? So this means, is the licensing clear? Do they have open licenses? Is it, or is it terms of use? I probably would not expect in this space that subscription models would apply to bioinformatics resources. Does it have a good privacy policy? Is there an ethics policy? And also, what is the funding model? Can it be demonstrated that this resource has been supported sustainably by institutes, by national funding programs, for a period of time up to today, and what are the future funding prospects? Finally, this is probably the least quantitative section potentially, but it was really useful to know what the impact of the resource is more widely. Many of the indicators that we've just been talking about really pertain to the scientific community, but how is this resource used by pharma, for example? How does it push through to different user groups and stakeholder groups? How does it accelerate science? And what would happen if this resource went away? What would the situation be like if we were just to press the delete button? And these can be very compelling, although they're a bit more narrative than some of the other ones. So this is to remind me to say that this is not, these case documents that we're making are called case documents because they're there to make a case, and the case will be discussed by humans, which will be largely the heads of nodes and Nicholas. And it's really to help make a human judgment. So these indicators are not just going to be pumped into some program that will come up with some metric and it'll be a thumbs up or thumbs down. It's going to be a discussion amongst people who know about these resources and know about the communities. So they support this sort of expert judgment and will inform the peer review process rather than dictate it. And so this is why I've gone for this case documents model. This is a somewhat old slide, but in the paper that's on the Elixir channel, again, there's an example of the template there that can be filled in. And we've just started doing some of this here at the EBI, and what we found is that the template works reasonably well. There are some things that we want to put in that aren't quite on the template or not quite right for the resource, in which case, it's not set in stone. If you need to add a row, then you can add a row. Or I mentioned the types of staff that might work on a resource as curators, bioinformaticians, and developers. But there might be another type of staff that might be specific to a certain kind of resource. So it's not supposed to be set in stone, but it's supposed to be a guide to the kind of case and the kind of information that would be required. And with that, I'm going to hand over to Susanna, who's going to talk about more about the process as opposed to the how we're defining the resources themselves. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. All right, so let's look at the details of the process next. So based on the feedback from the heads of nodes, we sat down here at the hub and we developed these detailed steps to test the process for the selection of ELIXIR core data resources. I will go over each of these steps in this presentation, and you please do ask questions in the end as well. But the details of all of this are available in the document that has been shared with all at nodes. So it's at tinyurl.com, elixir-core-data resources. So please take a look at there for all the details. So let's look at the process itself a little bit more. So it's really important to consider the eligibility criteria of core data resources. So first of all, I want to emphasize that it is about data resources. We do not consider other resources at this moment, so it's important to keep that in mind. Any candidate data resource that the node puts forward as a core data resource will have to have been included either in the node application or the node service delivery plan, or then the work program in case of EMBL EBI. And the purpose of this test selection round of ELIXIR core data resources is to evaluate the suitability of the criteria, the indicators that Joe just presented, and then also the robustness of this process. And we aim to select up to 20 core data resources in this first round. So the submission was opened in the beginning of October, and it will end now 1st of December. So all the candidate core data resources will have to be submitted by the 1st of December, the midnight then. The case study template that Joe just mentioned, it must be used and duly filled. And even if it's not set in stone what to include in it, it's really important to make sure that as far as it's possible, all the sections are filled in. You can, of course, add more information, but that's the minimum amount of information that needs to be filled in, is what is it in the template right now. And throughout the process here, any feedback or any help before the submission, please contact us at the email core-resources@elixir-europe.org. We'll look forward to your comments and feedback. And once you have completed the case study documents for your candidate core resources, they have to be submitted to this same email address by the head of node. So this is really, really critical and important, that we will only accept suggestions, submissions from the head of node. It's important to ensure that it's a coordinated submission from the node and that the head of node is fully aware what the node is submitting. So this is a very critical point to remember. And as I said, the deadline to submit the case study documents is until 1st of December, midnight. After the submission has closed, we will take some time here at the hub to review each of the submitted case study document. First of all, to check the eligibility criteria of the submitted candidate data resources. We will also check the uniformity and any missing information there might be. And if there is a need for more information, we will contact the head of node separately. So the main purpose of this refining stage is to make sure that the case study documents are uniform and they are consistent in a way that the review is possible. We will not sort or mark or exclude any submissions at this point. Of course, only if a submission is not eligible, then we exclude that. But this step is really there just to make sure that the review will be more straightforward. The review process itself will take place in 2 steps. We will use the ELIXIR Heads of Nodes Committee as the main reviewer group, the group of reviewers, the election committee. And we will make sure that conflict of interest will be declared and managed within the Heads of Nodes Committee, so it will be taken care of. The review will consist of two stages. So there will first be a pre-review and scoring by the Heads of Nodes, and then we will have a face-to-face meeting where we agree on a consensus scoring for each candidate core data resource. And the outcome of this review will be a recommendation for the first set of core data resources. So before the Heads of Nodes meeting that has now been scheduled for 6th of February, so before that meeting, we will ask each head of node to review all submitted candidate core data resources. We will provide template and help with this review, guidance for this review. We will, of course, use the indicators that Work Package 3 and Data Platform have prepared. And based on the indicators that Joe just presented, we will ask each head of node to review each candidate core data resource and assign a score on a scale 1 to 5, with 5 being the highest score. So here in this slide, there's an example how one candidate core data resource could be reviewed. And I'm also included a comment here to see again the slides that Joe just presented, where the indicators are described. So we will very much use those criteria description for this review. And as I said, the hub will provide a template for the Heads of Nodes to do this review. So this review will have to be done before the Heads of Nodes meeting, which is the 5th of February. So we will finalize the timelines for the Heads of Nodes and we'll inform all the details in the next Heads of Nodes meeting, which is in the beginning of December. But in all likelihood, we will have the Heads of Nodes to start the review in the second to last or last week of January, so that we have everything in ready for the Heads of Nodes meeting in the beginning of February. So then, the 6th of February, as we have the Heads of Nodes face-to-face meeting, the location for this meeting has not been determined yet, but it will be at a major airport in Europe. So at this meeting, each candidate resource will be presented by a heads of node assigned as the rapporteur. And the anonymous scores of the heads of nodes are presented and discussed, and a consensus scoring for each candidate core data resource is agreed. And as a whole, the heads of nodes will agree on the recommendation for the first set of core data resources at this meeting. The ELIXIR SAB, the ELIXIR Scientific Advisory Board, was presented this process for the selection of core data resources in October, and they gave a very strong recommendation that ELIXIR should involve also external experts in the review of candidate core data resources. And we've taken this recommendation on board now, and we have asked heads of nodes to submit nominations for external experts. And the next steps here are that the ELIXIR director will decide on the external reviewers, and we will share the submitted candidate core data resource, the case study documents, with these external reviewers. And we will try, the time is a bit tight, but our plan is to ask the external reviewers to conduct their review before the heads of nodes meeting in February, so that the review from these external experts is also then available for the heads of nodes when they do their consensus scoring at the heads of nodes meeting. So this is the plan for using external experts in this review as well. So after the heads of nodes meeting in February, we will prepare there a short statement for each node about their candidate core data resources. So there will be some almost immediate feedback to the nodes. And based on this meeting, the hub will then prepare a confidential report for the ELIXIR Scientific Advisory Board. So we will use the ELIXIR Scientific Advisory Board as our reviewer for the process. For these detailed steps that now we're taking to choose and select the core data resources. So the ELIXIR Scientific Advisory Board will assess whether this process is effective, whether it's fit for purpose, and whether it's excellence-driven and therefore suitable for ELIXIR. And to help the ELIXIR Scientific Advisory Board to do this review, we will prepare them a confidential report that includes all the details of the process and the review. And then this report will be presented to the ELIXIR Scientific Advisory Board in the beginning of March. And then the ELIXIR SAB will have their next meeting just before the ELIXIR All Hands meeting in 20th of March. And there they will then, based on the report, review the selection process itself, and then also the proposed list of candidate core data resources. The proposed list of core data resources, not candidate anymore at that point. And then we have asked the ELIXIR SAB to prepare a recommendation based on their review, and this recommendation, most importantly, will need to include a review of the process, whether it's robust and sufficient, or if modifications are needed. And the ELIXIR Scientific Advisory Board, like I said, we had a TC with them in October, and they are fully on board with this, and they are happy to do this review for us. Then, based on the feedback from the SAB, the ELIXIR heads of nodes will look at that feedback, and there is a possibility that the ELIXIR director with the heads of nodes can take a decision that those resources put forward by the heads of nodes will become the first set of ELIXIR core data resources. So in that case, this first test selection process will become actually the first round of selection of ELIXIR core data resources. But there is also the option, if needed, that we decide that yes, this was just a test round. We will not have selected any ELIXIR core data resources by the end of it in April. So there is option for both, depending on how it goes. Like I said, we look forward to having feedback from ELIXIR nodes at any time. Please send us email, and there will also be a request for feedback in the end of this whole process, so that we know what the nodes thought of this process as well. And based on the SAB recommendation, we may amend the process before the next selection round. If we decide to do that, then of course the heads of nodes will agree with any changes. and the selection process will earliest be repeated starting from October 2017 if everything went as planned. And then just a final note about the links to the documents that were discussed today. So the overview of the process, the case study template, and then the article that Joe mentioned on the F1000 Research channel. That's all at this point. Would there be any questions from the audience? No questions? I could, oh, there you go.
Yeah. There's one that you used when you were giving an example of how the application may be scored. This is Kim Hammond-Kozak at Rothenstein Research. And you seem to indicate different weighting for each of the 5 sections, but that may have not have been what you were trying to say, is that it was just giving an example of how a head of node may score the 5 sections, and they are all of equal weighting. Could you just clarify what is correct on this slide?
Yes, it doesn't mean to be uneven rating. So it is the same scale from 1 to 5 that is used for each of these 5 different categories. So basically what I try to say in this slide is to show that a head of node may decide that the scientific focus and quality of services is the highest 5, but then some other areas they might think that, okay, well, that's not equally excellent, we will give us a lower score. So it's not meant to be unequal rating.
Okay, so it's not weighted. Okay, that's fine.
Yeah, very good. Any further questions?
Hi.
Yes.
I would like to ask you about the training part. Has to be only specific training course, or we can include, for example, we do a university course where we, for example, talk about our resource, and then we do like technical part where we go in details how to use the resource and the database. Can we include this kind of courses, university courses, or has to be just a training course specific?
I think if using the resource is part of graduate or undergraduate degree course, then I think that would be worth putting down. Yes.
Okay.
I don't think I have to get into tremendous detail, but you can just say that on the level of yes, training is given for this resource. It is included in A, B, C, D. This master's in bioinformatics. We have 40 train online courses and a webinar every month or something. That kind of level of detail, not going into what all the courses are.
Okay.
I think that's valid, yeah.
And another thing, since we are also part of and when we have to give the usage, for example, since our data are also used from another are part of another database, can we include both usage, or we just use also only our database? We are part of IMEX, and our data are also intact. So,
I would just do what you can measure in a straightforward way. I think it might get
both.
No, I think if I were part of IMEX, I would talk about the usage. So I think Mint is Mint.
Yeah.
IMEX. So if I were a Mint manager, I think I would talk about direct usage of Mint, and then I would state in the dependency section that Mint is a partner in IMEX.
Okay, and then our data can be downloadable also from this and this other side, right?
Yeah, so that would be like a dependency. There's a dependency on Intact for data from Mint.
Okay, great.
Yeah, otherwise I think it would just get really, really difficult to do.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Great. Any further questions?
I have a question about the International Scientific Advisory Board. Does ELIXIR have a policy or principles to follow in terms of what they're looking for in an international SAB?
I don't think we have very detailed. Do you have? Okay, that's good.
I don't think they do, because I think the the SAB and how the resource is run is up to the resource, not to the hub. But I mean, in general, you know, I'm just thinking of the resources at the EBI. I mean, they're usually, you know, 6 to 10 people from different continents, you know, representing different stakeholder groups. You know, so there's a broad sort of community thing, but I don't think the hub gets involved. I mean, it's you know, one has to distinguish between what's the business of the data resource and what the business of the hub is. The hub is only interested in, yes, there is an international scientific advisory board, and it's up to the resource what the makeup of that is.
I think it's also more important to think about the international SAB offer node.
Yeah.
So I think that's where the hub perhaps would have more say, and that's what we're looking into in the service study plans as well, to give very, very lightweight guidance on what it could be. But it's very important, obviously, that it's international. That's the key point. But I think the conclusion here is that no, we don't have any detailed guidelines or anything like that.
Okay, that's fine. Thanks.
Any further questions?
Yeah, hi.
Yeah.
Thank you, Belgium. I have a question about the community. How would you define the community that you serve?
Yep, I'll hand to Joe.
That's a really good question. It's really hard to do. But I think it's, you know, I think it really depends. I mean, I think if it's, you know, if you're running something like PRIDE, proteomics database, then, you know, you could say that the community largely publishes in these 6 journals, something like that. That would give you a estimate, or perhaps you even know the labs that produced all the proteomics data, because there's only tens or hundreds of them. Mm-hmm. So I think it's really difficult. It's a difficult question, but it's really, it's not. That question is designed to really be able to demonstrate that, you know, if it's a smaller community, then, you know, it still can be a valid core resource. So some, you know, resources that cover a wide jurisdiction will have huge numbers of IP addresses accessing the website every week, and there's no way that a more specific type of resource would ever have those kinds of numbers. So, yeah, it's not an easy question, but it's really there to help support the resources rather than, you know, a definitive answer.
So you're not by default penalized if you're only serving a small community. It can be very highly valuable for a small community.
Yeah, I mean, I think the short read archive in the US has, you know, very few direct users actually, but all the people doing those experiments need somewhere to put their data. Mm-hmm. So it's you know, it's not a huge user base, but you know, if you press the button to take it away, then no one can put this data anywhere.
Right.
So it's that kind of. It's just trying to give a bit of context. I mean, I actually run a Europe PMC literature resource, and the size of the community that might use that is probably almost anyone, which really is frightening. I mean, because even members of the public are interested in clinical outcomes and so on. So, yeah, it's really just to indicate, you know, the maximum. You know, the PRIDE database will never have the same number of users as UniProt because it's just not as universal. But that's all right because it's serving a large numbers of that particular community.
Okay. No, thanks.
Great. Any further questions? I thought I could also mention there was one question that we received earlier. It was about resources that are maintained jointly by 2 or more nodes. So how would a case study document be submitted for these kind of resources? And the answer is that the case study document can be submitted just from the one node, but there should be a statement or letter that confirms that the submission is done together as a joint submission. But naturally, there is no need to submit 2 case study documents at all for that resource. It is resource-specific case study document. Mm-hmm.